Hello everyone, apologies for the delay, we were just having some technical difficulties. And welcome to this webinar brought to you by the AID and International Development Forum. Thank you very much for tuning in. The subject of the webinar today is Advice and Trends in Emergency Procurement and Humanitarian Aid, and it's going to be hosted by me. My name is Pedro Costa and I'm the conference producer. And our panel today, you'll be hearing from Brian Corry, and he's the acting Deputy VP Contract and Administration from the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and Kenny Cheung, and he's the Chief of Procurement from the World Bank. Along with answering questions, they will be updating us and sharing their insight into good practice into sustainable procurement, international procurement trends and business opportunities, how to address common contracting and compliance pitfalls, best practice and guidelines for procuring goods and services during emergency scenarios, value for money, monitoring and evaluating your procurement decisions, benefits and risks of social sourcing in local markets near the emergency affected areas, sustainability and scalability, specific challenges of procuring ICT solutions. Just a quick reminder that you can submit questions using the questions box on your screen, and we'll try to get through as many after we've heard from our panel. Also, a recording of this webinar will be available, and we'll email you to let you know how to get a hold of it. And without further delay, I'm just going to pass the controller over to Brian.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you could join us today. My name is Brian Corry. I'm the acting Deputy Vice President for Administration and Contracts at the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And I'm happy today to have the opportunity to go through a little bit about my organization, the work that we do, and then also to talk about what we consider to be some best practices in emergency procurement for humanitarian aid, which is, I know, of interest to everyone on the call today. So with that, I'll get into the presentation. I have quite a few slides here, but I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. I imagine they will be provided to you afterwards. If not, you can reach out to me directly, and I'd be happy to share them with you. So to begin, just a little bit about what we want to do is step down through what is MCC, what is the Millennium Challenge Corporation, some of the business opportunities that we have on the horizon right now. And then again, you know, when we look at the procurement of goods and services, what are some of the things that we find as best practices in those type of situations? So MCC, very quickly, we are a very new U.S. government organization. We were started in 2004 with bipartisan support, which we still enjoy today. We're led by a board of directors. We are organized, as the name implies, like a corporation. So we have a board of directors that includes, as you can see, a diverse group of individuals. And I think that is one of the things that provides us with a unique perspective and also a broad perspective. One of the things that is a common misconception about Millennium Challenge Corporation, we're not part of the U.S. Department of State. We're not part of USAID. We're an independent organization. We have a competitive selection process that looks at data for countries to see if they're eligible to be a partner with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Once we do have a partnership with a country, the country owns the actual implementation and the procurements for the project that they'll be working on. The focus is on results. We're constantly measuring, and if the results aren't there, we have in the past pulled out of a compact or a threshold. And the mission and the structure for us is very singularly focused. We are focused on ending poverty through economic growth, and our structure is completely aligned towards that. So there's no diversion from that singular mission. Country ownership, I mentioned that briefly. We have two types of programs that we fund, compacts and thresholds that I mentioned. Compacts are the large-scale projects. They're essentially a 5-year grant and can range up to about $700 million. And the threshold programs, smaller programs, and they're with countries that may not be eligible, based again on the measures for a compact. And they range between $10 and $50 million. Again, a shorter period of time for the grant, 2 to 3 years. And those threshold programs are done in the hopes of raising the country's scores so that they will be eligible for a compact in the future. Just to give you a quick look at the kind of the globe and where we've operated since our inception in 2004, you can see we have a pretty large footprint. We do a lot of work in Africa, also in Asia, but again, around the globe. So we have quite a big range. Active global footprint, you can see some of the countries that we're active in right now. But overall, since 2004, we've allocated through those compact and thresholds about $11 billion in 40 countries. So pretty impressive for a short amount of time. We're pretty proud of the impact that we've been able to have. Just to give you an idea by sector, the type of work we do, and different from some aid organizations, our projects are generally speaking very heavily focused in infrastructure. So you can see as far as energy, transport, some of the major areas that we work in, water and agriculture as well. And then as we get into a little bit more detail on this, you can see for some of the compacts that we have right now in the energy sector in 4 of these nations, the size of the investment that we have, and these again are large energy infrastructure projects, transmission, generation. Not as much on the distribution side. We usually have other donors in country who are taking that piece of the puzzle. Upcoming opportunities, you can see some of the countries that we have on here, and again, and the sectors that we're dealing in. Paul is up and coming, large distribution and transmission project there. And coupled with that, also institutional reforms in the energy sector, and you'll see that with our threshold and compact programs, that there is also policy reform that is coupled with the actual infrastructure development, again, with an eye towards eliminating poverty through economic growth. And as I just mentioned, the interventions we have, hard and soft, including the necessary policy reforms. There's a multidisciplinary focus on these projects from design, development, and implementation. Again, that implementation is owned by the partner country, and we at MCC headquarters are always focused on mitigating risks with the partner countries, as you would imagine, related to the completion, the sustainability of the project after the compact or the threshold is complete, and then environmental, social, and health and safety as it's coupled to that project. So business opportunities at MCC, now that you know a little bit about our model. One thing I had mentioned that the partner countries, they own these projects, and what we have is when a country is awarded a compact, they establish an organization called an MCA, a Millennium Challenge Account organization. And that is the organization that is running the compact, running the procurement, and they do their own procurements. And so those procurement opportunities are announced in 2 different places, DG Market and UNDB, the United Nations Development Business Site. And you can see those sites up there, so you can see our current projects that the MCAs are competing right now. So I would encourage you to look at those opportunities there. And then at MCC, we have a federal acquisition-based procurement organization, and those opportunities are posted on FedBizOps, and you'll see the site there as well. And sometimes, depending on what the requirement is, those opportunities may also be posted on DG Market. So just to be clear, there are these 2 separate channels of procurement at MCC, and that's based on the fact, again, that our partner countries are running their own procurements. So, and again, going back to the difference between the MCC headquarters acquisitions and the MCA acquisitions, 2 different sets of rules governing them. On the MCA side, you have the program procurement guidelines, a very short document, 77 pages, and then on the federal acquisition side, we have the federal acquisition regulation, which is a little bit more hefty at 2,500 pages. All seriousness, though, the difference between the 2 documents at a conceptual basis is not very significant. The PPG is very succinct in how it presents its information, but the concepts contained within both documents are very similar. So if you're used to dealing in a FAR-based environment, you would be very familiar with the concepts and the rules that are set up within the PPG, the Program Procurement Guidelines. And these documents, obviously, you can look at the federal acquisition regulation online, but the PPG, as far as the MCAs are concerned, is also available online on our website for you to read. Contract awards, when I mentioned before that we're in over 40 countries since 2004, $11 billion. This is a breakout of the contracts that we've awarded to date by country. So it gives you an idea that we have a pretty diverse portfolio of countries that are contracted with both MCC and the MCAs to accomplish the MCC mission. Just to give you a place to get a little bit more information on the MCC.gov website, there's this page, Work With Us, and it goes into more detail. It gives you some additional links as far as the compact procurements, those compacts for the MCAs, and also with the headquarters where you see Work With MCC there. And that will get you out to those opportunities so you can see what's currently available, what's currently posted, and our forecasts are also posted online. Additional information, just some additional channels to receive information about MCC and what's going on with MCC at any particular point in time. We do have an email list that you could subscribe to. RSS feeds also available, and then podcasts to give you even more information. So we're trying to continually get the word out to the folks that we work with, and here are just some of the channels in addition to the procurement opportunities that are on the previous pages that I shared with you. So getting down to some of the concepts of procuring goods and services for emergency scenarios. Just based on some of the information I shared as far as MCC and the MCAs and how we're structured, as you can imagine from that and the infrastructure projects that we do, we don't provide disaster relief as an organization. But we do find ourselves needing to procure goods and services in emergency situations. Some of the things that come to mind: natural disasters, political unrest, and sometimes we need to medically evacuate our personnel from an area in which we're engaged. And in all of those situations, as I'm sure many of you can share, time is of the essence, and that's where we get into some of the best practices that we see, balancing time being of the essence and also good, solid procurement practices. So when we look at this from the perspective of emergency procurements, there are 5 key areas that we look at and we think are something that would be of interest for everyone as we talk about best practices. And they are, as you can see, the requirements development process, the pricing, oversight and surveillance, accountability of our property, and the financial management. And these are some key elements that we are always focused on when we find ourselves in an emergency contracting situation. Obviously, the goal is to protect our people. That's utmost in our priorities. And then safeguarding property, so on any of these large projects, that whatever the situation arises, we're trying to safeguard that property so that the project can hopefully be restarted. But if it needs to be shut down, that we can shut down a project with minimal loss of property. So when we look at the first area, as far as requirements, there's 2 key areas that we see as far as leading to problems. As you'd imagine, unclear and change requirements and out-of-scope requirements. And this is not unusual, you could say, even in non-emergency procurements. But I think sometimes in the push for immediate action, sometimes the requirements are not well defined, and sometimes those requirements seem to expand into new areas that are out of scope, and we see some change requests that drive, sometimes it seems to be a life of their own. So these are the things that we see as major problems. And I think one of the things is to drive, from our perspective, our customers to consider the technical needs and the business strategies when defining what they need in an emergency situation. I think sometimes there is a knee-jerk response to an emergency situation, and people step back from this. It's kind of a let's go and get something done immediately, but there is time well spent, and even if that's a brief amount of time, in locking down the requirements, that they're clear, specific, and are measurable as far as the outcomes that we're expecting as an organization. And sometimes we also end up in the situation where specifications are sometimes so broad in an effort to make it everything in scope, and that again creates problems in and of itself. When changes do come up, again, going back to the original requirement, well defined that we are within scope before proceeding forward. So this is one of the things from a requirements perspective. As that emergency requirement comes in, it needs to be clearly defined. Okay, pricing in emergency scenarios. And again, I know in the onset of an emergency, something seems to be set aside as far as let's get things done, let's get out there, we're not going to be concerned about the pricing necessarily. And I would caution people to be very wary of doing that. And I'm not saying that pricing and the analysis of price is something that you're going to do that would adversely impact the speed of what you're performing, but I think there needs to be some fundamental pricing analysis that needs to be done based on the requirement, again, that is defined, to make sure that the organization is getting a fair and reasonable price, and that that price is actually bounded, and that it's not an open requirement that could put an obligation, an unbounded obligation on your organization, on our organization at MCC, that is unacceptable to go forward in fulfilling the requirement. There's a variety of price analysis techniques that can be used to ensure fair and reasonable pricing, and those techniques don't need to necessarily be time-consuming. Simple comparison to proposed prices, independent cost estimates, and analysis of pricing information that the vendor can actually provide to you in these situations. This is just a step in due diligence that will save time ultimately, and also liability on behalf of the oversight and surveillance. And this is another area where I think sometimes in the throes of dealing with an emergency, the oversight and surveillance that's necessary to make sure that the products and services that we're interested in receiving is sometimes overlooked. And if you don't have this type of surveillance in place, we end up with difficulties in making sure that the work's getting done on time, and that the vendor is in line with the requirements, and that we're getting the right skills and products assigned to the task to make sure that change is actually taking place. Obviously, this is something, it's a great area where we can utilize and leverage the resources within our organization to delegate oversight, to make sure that technical monitoring is taking place, inspections are taking place, and that we're accepting the deliverable. And that being said, we need to make sure that the people who we delegate to make sure that they know that they don't have the authority to change the agreement fundamentally as far as the price, quantity, quality, or delivery terms and conditions of the contract. So it's great to have that assistance, but people need to know the bounds that they're working within. A little bit more on that. In our organization, and I believe in many organizations, procurement's responsible for property administration, but there are parts of that we can delegate. And that property program is determined by, again, the vendor's own system, which, if we find adequate, is an excellent thing to rely upon, and it can speed up the procurement process. And the amount of property that's either assigned, in our case, to either the headquarters or our MCA partners. Again, commercially established property management practices are ideal, and we encourage our vendors to utilize them. We don't want to create anything new. We want to use what's available, what's acceptable, and then use that to mitigate the risk to both the MCC and the MCAs. And we do rely upon vendors to be accountable and maintain their records for property in their possession. So this is a partnership in an emergency situation where we're looking at MCC, the MCAs, and the vendors that we're working with to maintain this oversight of property. But without that, we many times find that in the analysis after an event, we find that property can go missing, and sometimes that's significant or can adversely impact the execution of the project. And financial management. This is one of the things, again, I think where people are rightfully so being very focused on the emergency at hand. Some of this type of oversight falls by the wayside, and we have had situations in this organization, and I've had it in previous organization, where invoices have come in. It's not necessarily a proper invoice. We don't have adequate proof of the receipt of the product or acceptance of the services, or that the terms and conditions of the agreement have been complied with. And payment has to be based upon that to make sure that we have what we need in the situation. And without that, we can't proceed with we've had vendors that we've actually had to remove from the procurement process, especially on the MCA side, because they cannot provide that proper receipt of the services performed, the product delivered, and that's an unfortunate thing. Other times we've had invoices coming in that have had payments requested that exceeded the final contract pricing. Sounds ridiculous, but this goes back to an earlier slide where we talked about the oversight, the technical oversight, and sometimes we find that people have exceeded their authority on the organization side, on the MCA or the MCC side, or that the vendor has done work that was never authorized to go forward. So this is where this all comes back together, and we need, as stewards of the organization, to make sure that financial management is taken care of in an emergency situation. So I think when we look at these 5 areas, what we really are looking at is, and you see it up here, back to basics. Time constraints in an emergency situation, they do demand rapid action on the half of the procurement organization. And those can be either new procurements or activation of pre-negotiated plans. Many of our agreements are set up as far as what we would do, as far as I had mentioned earlier, as far as evacuating people for medical reasons or in an emergency situation. However, in those situations, it's not necessary to jettison these 5 key areas when making sure that we're getting the emergency products and services that we need. And really, in all of these areas, this is not something that's just on the buyer side. It's something that's also used to protect the seller, and the seller should be just as concerned about all these things. If you're on the selling side of these things, it's not good, and you know, and I'm sure many on the phone can speak to. You don't want to receive requirements that are ill-defined. You don't want to have the pricing being questioned. You want to make sure that you have contact with the organization that you're performing these services for or delivering product to, that they have visibility into what's going on so there's no confusion. You don't want to have property accountability liabilities placed upon your organization if there's not a system to make sure that the property is being accounted for. And financial management, obviously, as a seller, you are concerned about the bottom line, you are concerned about being paid. So you want to make sure that that is as smooth and seamless as possible. So this is a shared responsibility between the procuring organization and the selling organization. And I can't emphasize enough that diligence in these areas will protect both parties. So from our perspective at MCC, from our partners' perspective in the MCAs, it's a back-to-basic focus. We can get very complex in procurements as far as what we're doing and how we're doing those procurements and the level of oversight and all that goes into that. However, when we get into these situations, we need to go back to the foundational elements of procurements, and those are the things. These are the 5 areas, essentially, that we concentrate on when we find ourselves in these situations. So with that, I will wrap up my piece of the presentation. I think Kenny has got some information to share with you as well, and then I'd love to have questions and a discussion.
Hello, Brian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll do a Q&A now, and then Kenny will join in a little bit later. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay,
fantastic. So we have received a few questions, so I'm just going to jump right into these. We have a question from Halo Alem, and got 2 questions. And the first one is that why most humanitarian NGOs spend their budget on staffing costs almost above 60%. And it says if it doesn't reach to grassroots level to solve the problem that intended to solve, and it seems that it just is about creating jobs for the citizens in overseas and not really support to the society.
As far as, it's an interesting point, and I think that goes back to, from our perspective at MCC, the majority of our spend goes through our compacts and our threshold programs, and that compact or that threshold and the organization that's set up in country, that's an organization, that MCA, the Millennium Challenge Account Organization, is run by the country. It's staffed with individuals from the country, and that's that country ownership model that we talk about. So the majority of the money that goes through MCC, when you saw that one slide when we talked about the $11 billion that we've obligated to date, the majority of that money is spent in country by in-country procurement professionals, and the smaller part of that is done by MCC, the government, is probably less than 10%. So the majority of MCC's money is going directly to a partner country, and then that partner country, their resources are the ones doing the procurement. So I understand that, when you talk about aid and how it's given and, how much is spent on the procurement, even, outside of the fact that, the country is doing the procurements, the individuals who are actually the procurement professionals in country are funded by that threshold or compact grant funding. So the majority from our perspective, and I understand that that's not always the case, and when we talk about humanitarian aid, the majority of it is owned by the country, it's owned by the resources in country.
Fantastic. And we have another question for you, Brian, and this one is from Sergio from the Republic of Moldova, and he would like to ask why the MCC is no longer active in Moldova.
The place I would encourage you to go to is if you look at our website, it'll go through each country. Every year we go through a very detailed scorecard of why we're either partnering with a country or why a country is not eligible, and it's based on a wide range of scores that countries can see and see where they're falling short. And that's why I mentioned before, sometimes we have countries that enter in as a threshold because they're not scoring high enough to be eligible for a compact, and that will bring them up to speed. As far as Moldova specifically, I don't have that information in front of me, but I would encourage you to look at the website where it will actually give you the score of your country, and it will tell you those areas where there is a shortcoming that would be preventing you from either getting a compact or a threshold program.
Oh, fantastic. So we've got a sort of a two-part question, and someone's asking where on the MCC website they can find your procurement procedures.
Again, there are two different things when you look at MCC and as far as procurement. If you're interested in the procurements that the MCAs are conducting, they will follow procedures called the Program Procurement Guidelines, the PPG. So if you go to the mcc.gov webpage, you can go to a link at the very top of the page on the main page called Work With Us, and it will take you to program procurements, and it will also take you to the MCC procurements. So as far as procedures for both of those different types of procurement, the MCAs use the PPG, and if you look, there will be a link for the Program Procurement Guidelines. If for some reason you don't see it there is a search bar at the top. Type in Program Procurement Guidelines, and the document will be available to you. It's actually an online document, so you can page through it in your web browser. And then on the other side, on the MCC procurements, if you're interested in those, we follow the Federal Acquisition Regulation, which is available online as well through many sites. If you just type in Federal Acquisition Regulation and Google that, it'll take you to many different versions of that, depending on how you like to search through the document. You can either get the full document, which is about 2,500 pages, or there are pages where it's more searchable, so it's a little bit more accessible. But those are the two areas where you can get our procurement guidelines, either FAR-based or program procurement guidelines.
And the second part of the question is, do you publish the country strategy documents / country programming documents?
I think as far as the opportunities and what they are, the actual awards are being posted right now as far as the MCA procurements, and as far as the upcoming opportunities, we are getting ready to post those. Those should be updated to our Work With Us page, and those will talk to the specific opportunities in specific countries. So if there's, say, a large hydro project, or there is a generation or a distribution or transmission project in the energy sector, those will be posted as specific contracting opportunities. And what we're trying to do is have targeted outreach there, so we can actually link up with companies that would be interested in those particular sectors. That's probably going to be posted within the next few weeks. So I would say bookmark the Work With Us page, and specifically on the MCA, on the compact procurements, look there, and that's where that information will be.
Okay, fantastic. We have a question from Laura, and she's asking if the MCC partner with the UN system, and if so, on what types of programs, projects, and initiatives.
We have not, to my knowledge, been partnered with the UN on these projects before. However, we do have an Office of Strategic Partnerships. So outside of the the procurement realm, we are exploring how we can leverage other organizations, other NGOs, other government organizations, and industry to engage in our projects. So that's another avenue that we're exploring. It's outside of my space of expertise as far as the procurement area, but that is an organization within MCC, and you can find their page also is linked to the Work With Us page, talking about how to engage in those type of strategic partnerships to support whatever project that we have coming up. And that's a relatively new initiative at MCC, a relatively new organization. But again, recognizing the fact that there is this capacity and these skills that we can leverage outside of the procurement space, we've begun to focus on that.
Okay, fantastic. We have a question from Melissa, and she's asking if the MCC put out a project or a budget forecast similar to what the USA do.
As far as we have an annual report that's published. There's also country-specific information depending on what phase a compact or a threshold is in. And then again, from the procurement perspective, we do publish our forecast as far as the procurements that we have that are in the pipeline in the basically a 12-month pipeline. And we're posting those. We've on the MCC side, on the headquarters side, we've actually posted those on the Work With Us site, and we're also posting in the FedBizOps. And on the MCA side, again, those are the ones that are going to be posted within the next couple of weeks, and we're also looking to post those on FedBizOps. So those are, from a procurement perspective, those are the opportunities, the upcoming opportunities that we have budgeted projects in line that we want to get the word out to the industry to know what is coming up so that they can pursue those opportunities.
Thanks. We have a question here from Julius, and he's asking, since the MCC is funded by USA Congress, does that mean its missions abroad will carry USA state rules?
When you say USA state rules, I think I understand the question, but again, if I'm off target, let me know. Going back to the construct of MCC and how we work, when a country is awarded a compact or a threshold, that country administers that, and the procurement rules that they use are the program procurement guidelines. And those program procurement guidelines, originally, the history of those guidelines, they were originally set up, well, at the beginning, at the inception of MCC, what MCC had done was taken the World Bank rules, procurement rules, and utilized those, and they've been customized from an MCC perspective over the years, so they're probably not even recognizable anymore from looking at the World Bank's procurement guidelines. But those are procurement guidelines that are specifically utilized by the MCAs. They are not U.S.-based rules. They're aligned towards international procurement. And I think if you take a look at those guidelines from a rule set, it's not like you'd see on the far side where that's based on U.S. law and United States procurements. These are international procurements. And going back to the one of the slides that I showed as far as the spend that we have had across the globe, there is a wide range of countries that have participated in the awards of MCA contracts and MCC contracts as well, actually. So I think the answer to the question, if I understand it correctly, is no. We're not. The majority are not U.S.-based rules or U.S.-focused. It's to really put out a level playing field where all nations can compete equally and have that level playing field to compete.
Thanks, Brian. We have another one here about the main concerns. What do you consider when determining best value for money in emergency circumstances?
Well, value for money, I think you can look at it from the perspective when you're looking at value for money in an emergency services situation. Obviously, the primary requirement is the accomplishment of that specific requirement in the emergency situation. Then we get down into the other factors that we would consider, and price is one of them. Past performance is another that we would consider. But obviously, I think the ability to accomplish the requirement, the mission as stated, is the primary thing that we look for in a best value situation. And really, when we're in an emergency situation, we are looking for that value. It's not a lowest bidder type of situation. We want to ensure that that the emergency situation, whatever it is adequately addressed, whether that's for property or it's for services. But again, the ability to perform within the time frame, because again, time is of the essence. That's the thing that is the factor for evaluation and a best value situation that is foremost in our minds.
Thanks, Brian. So we have another question, and this one is from Robert, and he's asking, is a bidding company need to be registered in the country of the project in order to bid?
No. No, the short answer to that is no, they don't need to be. Obviously, if you'll find it's intuitively it's a competitive advantage if you are based in the country where the work or the products are to be delivered. And what we find is a lot of time that we may have companies that are based in other countries outside of the partner countries that we're working with, but they've decided to basically invest in the country, in the area, and have a presence in that country. So that gives them a competitive advantage as well. But no, there's not a requirement. There's no requirement to drive the procurements to companies within a partner country. And this goes back again to what our focus is to try to create a level playing field. And so to try to to drive the spend to a particular country would be counter to getting that level global playing field for competition.
So next one, and someone's asking how they can register as a MCC supplier.
If you're two different things. If you're interested in the headquarters procurement, again, that's in the FAR-based situations. You would have to register in the System for Award Management, and you can look that up. It's the System for Award Management, otherwise known as SAM, and that's through GSA, so you can register as a vendor. There's a whole process that you would go through there. That's on that side. As far as the MCA procurements, that's on a country-by-country basis as far as the opportunities that you would be applying for, and there would be instructions as how to register for a particular opportunity based on the country and the procurement organization that you'd be dealing with specifically at the MCA in that country.
For now, I think we're gonna thank everyone so much for submitting the questions, and thank you so much to you, Brian.
And now we'll hear from Kenny Cheung. He's the World Bank's Chief of Procurement. Kenny will give us a brief overview of procurement for emergency and development projects.
Hello all, my name is Kenny Cheung. I'm the Chief of Procurement for the World Bank Group. I would like to provide you an abridged version of my presentation, and firstly by introducing you to the World Bank Group, my role and then my team within the group. The World Bank Group, as many of you may know, is the world's largest multilateral development banking institution. It was established in 1944, right after the World War II, where it was designed to provide finance and development funding for the rebuilding of Japan as well as Western Europe. It is headquartered in Washington, D.C., and we have more than 15,000 employees in more than 130 offices worldwide. The World Bank Group, as many of you know, has also two goals for the world to achieve by 2030. One, it is to end extreme poverty by decreasing the percentage of people living on less than $1.90 US dollars a day to no more than 3%. Secondly, It is also to promote shared prosperity by fostering the income growth of the bottom 40% of every country. Therefore, the World Bank is a vital source of financial and technical assistance to developing countries around the world. Well, we are not a bank in the ordinary sense, but a unique partnership to reduce poverty and support development. And we are made up of 5 institutions managed by their member countries. In terms of procurement, I lead a team of procurement professionals with the primary responsibility to procure between $1.6 to $2 billion worth of goods and services for the group globally. Well, the categories cover all operational and institutional needs of the group, with some 27,000 vendor relationships worldwide. My team and I also assist our peers in operations with governance and advisory services to guide the procurement decisions of the borrowing countries in the way they procure for all development projects, from infrastructure to health, education, energy, transport, refugee relief, fragile, conflict and violent states, etc. In terms of emergency procurement, we focus the needs to cover the emergency needs of our own staff, especially in high-risk locations. Well, this may include vehicles, food supplies, shelters, medical and pandemic, evacuation services, and so forth. Well, our key approach is to ensure a sufficient supply in the greatest need and time to establish framework agreements with our major suppliers globally, but with adequate local supply distribution at the same time across all the various offices and also serving the various language and cultural needs. One other aspect is that we have a very well-defined inventory availability and pricing in our framework agreements, and we approach those with regular reviews on a 3-year cycle. We also partner with our corporate security, emergency response, HR, and communication teams to define those requirements. Within each of our locations, we have also our own limited inventory of supplies and maintain and monitoring to ensure non-expiry and also the latest technology and versions available should they be replaced. As I mentioned around the various partnering teams that we work with to define the requirements, one of the very key aspects is to ensure that our internal management understand how to draw down on the inventory as well as the proper utilization of supplies, services and equipment at the times of need. So there is a key aspect of our development of proper operating manuals, trainings, simulation exercise drills, for example. They are all very essential in our procurement responsibilities. With all of the above, the same advisory also provide to our client countries when it comes down to procurement to support their own projects and local needs. Of course, we have an arm's length relationship with our client countries, and therefore we do not do the procurement on their behalf. However, the guidance, the standards, the benchmarks and the relationships that we have with the suppliers community worldwide are shared with our clients countries to ensure that they get the best arrangements and also ensuring that they have the best operating model and environment in place. So I hope this has been useful in terms of an initial glimpse into the subject of emergency procurement within the World Bank Group. It is only a brief version of the presentation. So if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me anytime via Pedro and his team in the AID Forum.
Thank you very much to everyone for submitting your questions, and thank you, Brian and Kenny, for sharing your insights and knowledge with our audience. If you would like to find more about our webinars or have any suggestions for future topics or speakers, we would love to hear from you. I would also like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that you get the opportunity to meet procurement professionals at our summits. The next one, our Global Disaster Relief and Development Summit, will be held in Washington, D.C. on September 6th and 7th. You can get more information and regular updates on our webpage, www.aidforum.org. A big thank you from the AIDF team, and goodbye.